Today we are doing a mock draft. It's still really early in the season, but we are joined with special guests Jagger and Joey Wright joining us today on the Football Guys Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going to keep this one really simple, fellas. We're going to go 12 teams, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, tight end, a flex, a couple bench spots here. We're doing half PPR. And we're going to make this one really simple. We're doing this over on Sleeper. We got a great partnership with Sleeper throughout the season here. So if you are starting a brand new league, head on over there. Guys, anything that we want to talk about here before we hop into the mock draft, or we just want to rip it?
Let's just grip it and rip it.
Grip it and rip it.
Yeah. Rip. Oh, you guys are so weird. I hate every part of that. All right, Dave, go ahead and start us off.
I did. Christian McCaffrey.
All right, so
for anyone not paying attention to, we don't have 12 people drafting here. We're doing the 4 of us, and then we just have CPUs picking the other 8 teams just to keep it moving a little bit quicker. CeeDee Lamb at 102, Alfredo. I think that's the pretty obvious choice right now.
Yeah, he's my wide receiver 1, and I don't know if there's a big consensus on it, but I'm just going to go with the guy that I know is going to get volume. That team is going to have to pass a ton. There's really no running game there. And then after that, the CPU goes with Justin Jefferson at the 103, Tyreek Hill at 104, Jagger at the 105. It almost kind of feels like the default player you have to take.
Such an easy pick.
The way that the board went, you go with Jamar Chase. Talk to us a little bit about Chase.
As much as a lot of people like Amon-Ra St. Brown, I chase upside. I mean, you guys have drafted with me enough to where, like, I want the guy that's going to get 30 points or like 4, essentially. That's kind of how I draft my team. And regardless of what anyone thinks about Joe Burrow and his health, I watched Jake Browning make Jamar Chase a still low-end wide receiver 1. So even if Joe Burrow's got like a bum wrist, I'm willing to risk it for the biscuit. So like you guys said, this was just a smash and move on and see what happens, you know.
Yeah, I would have taken Chase over Jefferson. So
yeah, I've got Chase over Jefferson for me as well. And then, we've been doing a lot of drafts over on Underdog, and I keep saying the one discrepancy to me that jumps out that I don't really understand is why Puka Nacua is going ahead of A.J. Brown. I'm glad to see that Sleeper has it right because I'm on the pick with 108, and A.J. Brown's an easy pick for me to make right there. I prefer him ahead of all of the other guys available.
And that says a lot when I'm saying that's too much dynasty brain doing that. That's way too much dynasty brain doing that.
After A.J. Brown, we see Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs. So we're seeing 4 running backs here in the first round. So I think that's probably close to what we'll see: 4 running backs, 8 receivers, or 3 running backs, 9 receivers. Joey, you come up here at pick 11. You go with Puka Nacua over Garrett Wilson, over Marvin Harrison Jr. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot of people making arguments one way or another. I've seen Puka go ahead of A.J. Brown. I've seen him go behind Marvin Harrison. So what made you lean into Puka Nacua? And then you get Marvin Harrison back on the turnaround.
I do. I would have taken A.J. Brown over Puka, but Puka at 111, I'm actually really happy with him there. I had this exact same start, Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison Jr. last night in a Discord mock that we did. And I liked it there. And I was like, if it pops up to me again today, I'm going to do it here. I think Puka's value is baked into him right now. If we would have seen any of the other wide receivers that went ahead of Puka go have the season that he did last year, we might see Puka go as like the 103 or the 104. The fact that he's going at the 111, I think we're kind of baking in, was it a one-year wonder? Was it not? I do think he'll be able to produce again this year. And then Marvin Harrison Jr., I just think there's a ton of upside. The talent is there with him. I think he's going to unlock Kyler Murray. I'm not afraid of, Trey McBride taking anything away from him. I love this as a wide receiver start. I've been doing a lot of best ball lately, and I've been kind of falling in love with these late running backs that I've been getting, these late mid-round running backs.
It's some good upside here with these guys. There's obviously a little bit of risk baked in, but I think that goes into the ADP with Nacua. Upside with Harrison, though, is really nice, and there's always the potential for a stack later. After your Marvin Harrison pick, let's just go back really quick. At the 201, we see Jonathan Taylor, then Marvin Harrison with Joey. Chris Olave goes to the 203, Saquon Barkley at the 204. Dave, you went with Drake London, a guy we've talked a lot about. And right now he's going as, that's what, the wide receiver 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And so that's about where we have him ranked. You actually get him after Olave, which I think you have him ahead of Olave. So if that's the case, it's pretty good value for you.
Yeah, and it's tough. I feel like the top to middle of round 2 this year is kind of jumbled up. I'm not crazy about a lot of the players here. They all have big red flags. Sam LaPorta with the touchdowns last year, Kyron Williams potentially losing some work to Blake Corum. Saquon Barkley is probably one of my favorite picks, but he didn't fall to me. Drake London, just go check out the episode that we did last week talking about breakouts. You talked about Drake London. I talked about Kyle Pitts, very much so in on the Atlanta Falcons offense. So Drake London, it's risky, for a guy that hasn't even eclipsed 900 yards in a single season so far at this point in his career. But we've seen the underlying peripheral metrics that tell us that he's a good player. And we got to hope that Kirk Cousins being there can elevate him to that wide receiver 1 status.
Now, after Drake London, we get Kyron Williams off the board, and we're going to have a lot more talk about Kyron Williams throughout the offseason. Sam LaPorta ends up being the tight end 1 at the 207. Joey, how did you feel when that happened? Because I know that hurt your feelings quite a bit.
It did hurt my feelings. I am kind of the Sam LaPorta guy. The thing with Sam LaPorta is he has risen into that mid-second round, so I'll no longer be the Sam LaPorta guy in drafts. I cannot take him there. When I was getting him early third to the mid-third, I was super happy to get Sam LaPorta there. His value's gotten too high even for me, who I absolutely love the guy.
After LaPorta went there, he goes at 208. Jagger, you take the first quarterback, Josh Allen. And I think there's a lot of people worried that maybe Josh Allen isn't the QB1 anymore. And I'll let you make your pick here before I finish this question. So try to make your pick fast. But Josh Allen has been QB1 in, if I'm not mistaken, Dave, 3 of the last 4 seasons or 2 of the last 3 seasons, whatever it is, the QB1 overall. So are we making too much of this, of the Bills losing their receivers? Did they not retool well enough? So much of Josh Allen's value is baked into his rushing ability. So Jagger, is that kind of where the mindset was for you to take him as the first quarterback here in round 2?
Yeah, because you hit on one particular point that I'm going to go the opposite direction. Like you said, a lot of people are baking him and losing tools and lowering his price. I'm going the opposite. I think he's going to run a lot. Like maybe he won't get the touchdowns because they're bringing in someone like Ray Davis and they hope that James Cook can kind of take a lot of that pressure off. But I think he's going to run a lot. And I think we see him shift into his 2022, 2023 Patrick Mahomes era, where it's going to be a lot of Deacon and Duncan to like his many slot guys like Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, but he's ultimately going to get his. Let's put it that way. And then especially when you're in 1 QB, if Josh Allen falls to me right there, I'm probably going to smash because I feel like I have a positional upside in comparison to someone else. And then let's say that like I do chase stacks more in redraft, I can get Joe Burrow much later if I want to do that, but right now I can have a naked Josh Allen because, who's his receiver?
Ayo.
I can get, Kincaid later.
Careful.
The whole key is it's making Alfredo uncomfortable without doing a full blown sorry, Joe.
Oh no, that's fine. That's fine. A little uncomfortable. Definitely a little uncomfortable. After Josh Allen, we see Brandon Ayuk, that's who I was hoping for at my pick. Brandon Ayuk goes to 209, then Devon Achane at 210. I go with Nico Collins at the 211, and it was more so just looking at the other players that were around in ADP and me saying I like the upside of Nico Collins and that offense that he's going to be in, and wanting to go wide receiver over running back there. Josh Jacobs goes to 212 and then turn back around with Devontae Adams. And this is where I was thinking maybe I take my running back. I could go with Derrick Henry, who I was looking at. Instead, I end up going with Travis Kelce here, who, Dave, you and I talked about him still as our tight end 1 for the season. There's really no other way to look at it in our opinion. And I'm pretty happy here going with 2 top tier wide receivers on 2 good passing offenses. I get the tight end 1. I'm happy with this build. And I think there's still going to be some value left later with running backs. Now, after that, we see DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Jagger. Your dynasty brain turned back on because you go with Malik Nabers. Is that how you really value him for redraft? Do you think that he should be considered ahead of guys like Jalen Waddle, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman? Is he that good? Is the situation that good for him?
Not only I was really like milking the clock. I wasn't even milking the clock. I was panicking of who I'm going to get in Waddle and Nabers. And I think that Nabers has that nice floor because he is the only target. And a lot of people already understand this. He has the game that that translates to a bad quarterback. You could throw it to him underneath and he could still be incredibly productive. And I put him in that same model of Jamar Chase, where he's a game breaker. All it's going to take is one. Arguably, you could say that with Jalen Waddle, but I'll just admit, guys, it was a little bit of beep panic when someone's underneath you and they beep, and you just kind of like freak out, and then you got to go. That was a little bit where I was at there, but I still like the pick, and it fits my my style nonetheless.
So you took a left-hand turn when you were supposed to take a right because someone beeped at you at the red light?
Yes,
that
100%. Or you take your wrong exit because you're like, I'm not sure.
All right, so after that, we see a couple running backs go off the board. Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, who honestly I think that's great value for Derrick Henry.
I was
considering him.
Derrick Henry at 308. That's who I had queued up.
Yeah, that would have been nuts. I was considering him at 302. But Dave, you end up going with Jalen Waddle. So you've started off here with 3 wide receivers and a quarterback. So the 3 wide receivers, AJ Brown, Drake London, Jalen Waddle. And then in round 4, you came back with Lamar Jackson. So is this typically the build that you are going to find yourself starting with? Do you go in with this perceived understanding, I want to get some good wide receivers early and get a quarterback and really wait on running back? Is that a preference for you, or is that a value thing that you've seen this year?
Because Drake London, there's a little bit of risk that I talked about. We know the ceiling is there, but he's far from the guarantee. I do want to take a strong wide receiver 3 when I start off like this. And Jalen Waddle has shown that he can be an elite target earner, and he could also be an efficiency monster. We saw his rookie season where he was just pulling a 30% target share. And then we saw year 2 playing behind Tyreek Hill, where he was just extremely efficient on a smaller target share. And then last year it kind of came together where he was pulling targets and he was efficient, but he was dealing with injury. I think if Jalen Waddle is healthy, we see him easily giving us top 10 production. So I like him as a wide receiver 3. And then Lamar Jackson, for me, there are some late round quarterbacks that I like this year, but Lamar Jackson, we saw in the second half of the season when the Todd Monken offense started to kind of take form in Baltimore, he was giving us elite production. So I'm okay taking Lamar Jackson here because I think there's a little bit of a quarterback fall off. I was really surprised to see Mahomes and Stroud going before Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially obviously it's going to depend on the point per touchdowns in your league. Typically, if you're doing 4 points per touchdown in your league, you're going to gear a little bit more towards passing touchdowns. Excuse me. You're going to gear a little bit more towards those rushing quarterbacks, and those guys just become so much more valuable. To finish off round 3 here, we saw Jalen Hurts go at the 3.9, Mike Evans at the 3.10. Joey, you went with Michael Pittman at the 3.11, so a similar build where you started 3 wide receivers, then Deebo Samuel and CJ Stroud on the turn, then back to Trey McBride, who is one of my favorite tight ends here. So you and I have a very similar build right now, Joey. 3 wide receivers and a tight end. Dave, you got 3 wide receivers and a quarterback. Jagger, 3 wide receivers, quarterback, tight end. You're around ahead. So Joey McBride here, you're taking him as a tight end 3. Yeah. He definitely has the ability to be the tight end 1 overall, and you're one of our more accurate tight end rankers, sir. So
I was second last year in like in that little contest.
You should know. Don't act like you don't know how high you ranked it.
Well, I couldn't remember if I was first or second, and then I was like, well, I went as a first because I'd have just kept talking about that if that was true. So I must have been second. No, yeah, I finished second in tight end rankings. Yeah, I like Trey McBride a lot, especially when he goes, what was that, 15, 16 picks after LaPorta and a whole almost round after Travis Kelce. I love that value on him. Michael Pittman, I did settle for versus Mike Evans. I'd rather have Mike Evans, but Pittman falling to me had 150 targets last year, over 1,100 receiving yards. I'm happy to settle with that.
And I want to talk about something, Dave, that you mentioned, that you were so surprised that Lamar Jackson goes after Mahomes and Stroud. Are we gassing up CJ Stroud a little bit too much? Even as the guy who took Nico Collins, I wasn't necessarily going to be targeting CJ Stroud for a stack, especially in these 4 point per passing touchdowns leagues. We just don't see as much rushing upside with CJ Stroud. So are we gassing him up a little too much here? He went as the quarterback. What is this? Quarterback 3 in this draft. Yeah. That seems a bit nuts.
And I think he had like 13 rushing yards per game last year. Like, he doesn't have that rushing upside. Like, drafting CJ Stroud where you're drafting him, you're hoping that he passes for 5,500 yards and 50 touchdowns. Like, there's no rushing upside to insulate his floor or his ceiling. So CJ Stroud, great quarterback, don't get me wrong, but it's really, really tough for me to pull the trigger if that's where he's being drafted.
Now, after we see CJ Stroud and all those quarterbacks come off the board, so it's CJ Stroud, Trey McBride, Patrick Mahomes, Rashad White, Lamar Jackson goes to Dave, Isaiah Pacheco, DK Metcalf, and then Jagger, you went with Dalton Kincaid, who we have talked a lot about Dalton Kincaid on these podcasts, so we won't, go back into that, but you get the nice stack there with Josh Allen. Then Tank Dell comes off the board, Ken Walker, and then I went with Devontae Smith. Not a guy that I draft a lot of, but I see the value there as a guy, drafting him as my wide receiver 3. I will absolutely take him at that point towards the end of round 4. Then on the turn, we see Mark Andrews go off the board as the tight end 5. Another guy, great value. Keenan Allen at the beginning of round 5. Mark Andrews, end of round 4. Keenan Allen, beginning of round 5. That feels still a bit early for Keenan Allen. And I know that that's a CPU pick there, but guys, I think I'd be taking Keenan Allen quite a bit later behind some of these guys like Zay Flowers, Amari Cooper, T. Higgins that went off the board after him. I went with with Alvin Kamara here at the 502, and that's my running back 1. Dave, I know you and I have talked about a lot about it. You talked about it today on your best ball stream. Alvin Kamara is a guy that I just don't understand.
Running back 5 last year.
I don't get it. I don't get it why he's dropping so far. What's in the minds of people right now that has him falling like this? Is it just because he's old?
He's old. The Dennis Allen offense sucks. Derek Carr sucks. I understand all of that, but it didn't stop him from pulling like 7 targets per game last year when he was on the field with Derek Carr. I think that it's just he's might not be the guy he was 3 or 4 years ago, but he is just so good at getting open in the flat and pulling targets in his direction that it gives him such a safe floor and ceiling.
Seeing Alvin Kamara fall like that to round 5 and seeing some of these quarterbacks go earlier, it really makes me happy. And I think we all kind of did the same thing here as we waited on finding running back value. And I think it's working out pretty well for us. After Alvin Kamara, I take him. Cooper Kupp comes off the board. Then George Pickens. Jagger, you went with Zay Flowers here. So you got a nice upside young wide receiver, and you just made your pick now. So I do want to ask you a little bit about Zay Flowers. You got him as your wide receiver 3. This is a guy that we've talked about that could very easily just continue his ascension and go from being around wide receiver 24 to being like a top 15 guy. Is that something that you're really looking at here with Zay Flowers? Because you got him as your wide receiver 3. This is a dude that could very easily end up being, I don't know, how high is the ceiling for him? Is it top 15? Is it top 12? What's the ceiling in your eyes?
I think it's top 15. I don't think I'd see him in the top 12 because I still believe in Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews is still there. And like I see them more being like a 49ers with a little bit more Lamar Jackson, where every guy might have his day. But I think we saw his fantasy floor, if anything, last season, because if you look at reception perception, or if you looked at his profile before he was drafted, anything like that, like, that there's still a lot left on the bone and they can utilize him more downfield. He will still be a gadget guy for sure, just because he excels in the open field, but there's just a lot more. And Odell Beckham Jr. is not there anymore. Nelson Aguilar is a thing, but it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone's making decisions off him. It seemed like a no-brainer. And especially like you said, I would take him ahead of Keenan Allen 10 times out of 10.
After Zay Flowers, we see Amari Cooper go off the board. Then T. Higgins. Dave, you went with Joe Mixon, who you've talked about all throughout this offseason as a guy that should remain high on people's draft boards. I think it's a really similar situation to Alvin Kamara, where we've just got a running back that people don't like, but he's got plenty of volume, good offense, should have a ton of value in drafts. After that, we see Rome Odunze and Christian Kirk come off the board. Joey, you went with James Cook at the 5'11", and then George Kittle and James Conner come off the board at the turn here. And this is where you really upset me, Joey, because you went with Anthony Richardson at the 602, which I think is just an absolutely phenomenal pick. I was hoping he would somehow fall to me at the 611. So you get the stack here. Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman. Is Richardson going to be a guy that you are consistently targeting in drafts, especially if he's falling this low? He ends up being quarterback 6, if I'm not mistaken, in here. Once again, another guy with the potential to be quarterback 1 in the draft.
If he falls almost 2 rounds after Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, I'll take him in the 6th round. I'm a notorious wait on quarterback guy, but I will not pass on value. And for me, the value on Richardson was too high, especially when I have Pittman. And it's fun to stack players. It's fun to watch that Colts game on Sunday and see Richardson connect with Pittman and get double the points. So that was an easy decision for me.
So I do want to take this conversation to the opposite side, though, right? Because we do want to have as much context to this home league fantasy draft stuff versus maybe best ball or DFS and tournaments. And like you said, it's nice. We have fun when we see our stacked players score. But we've talked about this in the past. And Dave, as soon as you finish picking, I want to throw this to you and ask you, how much do you really target stacking in your home leagues and in your fantasy drafts like this? Because it is such a small field. You're not going up against, thousands of people.
Yeah, it's not quite as important, and I'll do it, but I don't force it whatsoever. Like if it falls into my lap, I'm happy to have it, but it really doesn't make a difference when you're playing against 12 people the same way that it does when you're playing against a field of 600,000 plus. So it's not something that I really think about too much when I'm drafting redraft teams like this.
I find myself still trying to do it. Like it'll
Yeah.
always be there in the forefront of my brain. And then when it doesn't happen, I don't know. I'm not kicking myself as much, but it's just one of those things that has now been ingrained in her brain. Jag, you wanted to say something?
I know that, like, I really was almost clicking the button on Joe Burrow, right? On my 2 picks, and I'm like, "Wait, get out of best ball brain when I need running backs and the value's still there." Because like Dave said, you're only playing against 12. I'm not playing against 12 million, so this
Mhm.
time, so
And here's the other thing too is like stacking sets you up for a high end range of outcomes, but it also sets you up for a low range of outcomes. And when you're drafting in best ball and you're doing hundreds of teams every offseason, you want to swing for the widest range of outcomes possible because that's how you score high. But if you're just doing one league with your friends and you stack and that stack doesn't hit, you're double screwed. And it happened to me last year in my home league. I kind of had this best ball brain when I was drafting my home league, took Patrick Mahomes in round 2 and Travis Kelce in round 3. You can imagine how that worked out for me. I lost my low home league and ended up being like the laughing stock of that league last year. And I did the smart thing, set up for a high end range of outcomes, but Patrick Mahomes had a down year. Travis Kelce was injured, and it was almost impossible to come back from that.
Boy, some of these picks just absolutely crushed me. I'm going to end up making a running back pick here that I'm not super excited about, but I think it works out well.
The board gets
Let me go
thin real
ahead.
Mm.
fast.
Yeah, it's not great, but I still really like the wide receiver, excuse me, the running back value that's here. And some of these wide receivers aren't too bad. I'm actually looking right now at making the decision between Jackson Smith Najigba and Christian Watson, who's off the board. So there you go. Jackson Smith Najigba easily becomes the pick there for me. I want to catch us up though here on the board. So after Anthony Richardson at the 602, we see Jaden Reed at the 603, Kyle Pitts 604. And Dave, I feel like were you wanting Kyle Pitts there despite having Drake London? Is that something you ever try to do even in your redraft leagues?
Yeah, I'd have gone with Pitts if he fell to me, but I've said it all offseason. Talked about it on Friday's show as well. I want to try to leave every single draft with one of these 8 tight ends. Sam
Yeah.
LaPorta, a little bit overpriced for me, so I'm not crazy about him. Find myself drafting a ton of Travis Kelce, a ton of Mark Andrews, a ton of Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, Evan Ingram. I feel like once you get past Evan Ingram, you're just kind of hoping and praying for all these guys. Brock Bowers, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goddard. Sure, they've got it in them where they could be relevant fantasy tight ends, but you're getting almost, I don't want to say guaranteed production, but you know what you're getting with these top 8 guys. So I'm trying to leave all of my drafts with at least one of those top 8 tight ends.
Yeah.
After your Evan Ingram pick, Rashee Rice comes off the board in round 6. And I think that pick is going
Eesh.
to be something that will be a lot later in real drafts. And I think as we find a little bit more information out about Rashee Rice and that whole situation in Kansas City, we'll get a little more clarity on the actual average draft position for him. Aaron Jones comes off the board at 607. Then Jagger, you go with Ramondre Stevenson. And you actually, just to kind of jump around here a little bit, you actually go 3 straight running backs with your picks. Ramondre Stevenson, Jonathan Brooks, who I absolutely love it. I was hoping he'd come back around to me. And then Trey Benson. So is this something intentionally? I know you're one of our dynasty guys. It seems like there's a lot of dynasty brain here, a lot of rookies, but there's always some value to be had with these rookies. So is that something that you intentionally look at when you're going into drafts of let me get these rookies who I have a good enough team, I will be in the playoff hunt, and these rookies are going to come around towards the end of the season or middle of the season and give me just a ton of value?
Yes, like you nailed it. Like I've had this strategy even before I got into Dynasty. I tend to yeah, get the younger guys who tend to come to the top towards the later rounds. And I like having high upside pass catchers. Like Dave said, I don't want to leave a draft without a top 5 tight end. I'll go further. I want a top 5 guy if I can. And then as my wide receivers, generally I go back to back unless Josh Allen falls to me. And that just kind of forces it forces my hand. So like one, I know I'm going to have to get running backs and get them while I can. And B, I know the value that I like there. And then towards these later rounds, I think it's always a better bet to bet on the younger guys who could rise to the top than some of these older vets that are already past their apex, and that's why they're there to do something on a new team.
Dave absolutely hates beating the clock on these picks every time.
We're,
Times out
we're
after he
like
puts them
3
in his
rounds
queue.
ahead of what we're talking about, so I'm
Yeah,
just purposely letting the clock run so we can try to catch up a little bit. And you guys
too.
have not gotten the memo.
Yeah. Don't worry. I got you. I'll speed it up here. So after we see Ramondre Stevenson come off the board at the 608, we see Brock Bowers at the 609, which that seems a tad bit early here. But remember, a lot of what we're seeing in these drafts with the computer is actual ADP from people that are drafting. So it's not something that's unrealistic, but it's probably we see Brock Bowers go a little bit later. After that, Hollywood Brown at the 610, and then I went Kyler Murray at the 611. And this is a guy, Dave, that you and I have talked about as being like every bit as high ceiling as a guy like Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson. And if I'm going to be getting Kyler Murray at this discount at the 611,
If I
end
knew
of the
Kyler
sixth
was going to
round,
be there at 605, I never would have taken Lamar at 405. I'll tell you that.
that was going to be my exact question is why would I take Lamar in the 4th if I know I can get Kyler in the 6th? And that's not to dunk on your pick because you have, it's a great pick. I didn't expect to see Kyler Murray hanging out this late in the draft.
In hindsight, I'd much rather have Dalton Kincaid and Kyler Murray than Lamar Jackson and Evan Ingram. And when you look back at the board, you can kind of see where you made those mistakes. And I took Lamar Jackson over Kincaid. And then because I had a quarterback, I didn't want to take Kyler Murray, and I ended up opting for Evan Ingram. But you look at the possibility, what I could have done was take Kincaid in the 4th and then Murray in the 6th. I think I would have liked that scenario much better than what I ended up with.
Yeah, and even looking at the board here, Joey, I think that the Kyler Murray would have been a good value for you. I mean, I don't think it would have gotten past me. So did you make that choice between Richardson and Kyler? Was that kind of what you were doing there? You went with the guy that had the higher upside?
I would have, Richardson I have ranked higher, so I took him above Kyler.
Okay.
But if Kyler would have been there at 6'2", actually, I don't know. I don't know if I would have gone Kyler at 6'2". I might have waited another round. That value on Richardson was just too good for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then that's what you did. You went Richardson over Kyler there. And it's the right move as well. Like that's a guy who I think does have a little bit of the higher ceiling. So after Kyler, we see Jordan Addison and Joe Burrow come off the board. And so Joe Burrow looks like he's kind of the odd man out in this, especially in those 4-point per passing touchdown leagues. I went with Zamir White at the 702, just another guy who I think great value at the running back spot, should get a ton of volume there in Las Vegas. We've talked plenty about this, is that he's not necessarily another Alex Madison or Mike Davis type. This is a guy that actually has a good prospect profile on a team that wants to run the football. After that, we see David Montgomery at 703, DeAndre Swift, 704. Jagger, we already talked about your pick of Jonathan Brooks. Then Dak Prescott, Xavier Worthy, Chris Godwin goes to Dave. Sorry, excuse me. Then Terry McLaurin, Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, and then Javonte Williams at the 712. And guys, as I look at it, it kind of seems like round 7 is where it gets really stinky. I'm not a fan of many of these picks, but Dave, you took Chris Godwin, who at the 708, I think it's a fantastic value for a guy that I think we're all undervaluing a little bit.
Yeah, and I was really torn between Godwin and Terry McLaurin. I like both of those players, but maybe I'm just an idiot for sipping the Kool-Aid. But the idea of him moving back to the slot, which we've gotten reports about for the last few weeks now, is really exciting. That's when we saw him have his best fantasy season ever a few years back. So we've kind of seen him playing in a role that he isn't necessarily suited for the last couple of years, and he's still been good. He's still been giving us wide receiver 3 production, but this guy draws targets. He's great at making contested catches. He's a great route runner, and I think that he will just succeed even better out of the slot. So again, kind of looking for upside after I made that London pick in round 2, and Chris Godwin is a guy that I see with a ton of upside for where he's getting drafted in the 7th.
Joey, the guy that you took here in the 7th that I've dubbed the stinky round was Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Now, How do you handle this mentally? Let's talk about the intangible part of fantasy football, because a lot of us, yeah, we can break down the numbers and the data and all that, but every time we get into a draft, people always say, "No, I'm not drafting that guy. He burned me last year. Everything was just it was a nightmare." Calvin Ridley is going to be one of those guys this year in drafts, and not only did he, with the perceived burn people last year, but he's on a different team now with a quarterback that's probably worse, probably a little more competition, but this is still a talented guy that can give you value back in fantasy football. So, how does that mindset work for you when you're in a draft? Is it simply just seeing a good player fall to you and you take him? How do you overcome that hurdle of saying he burned me last year?
Why I didn't like Calvin Ridley last year is because he did burn people as a third or fourth round pick. As a seventh round
Mhm.
pick with over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, yeah, he's playing on a new team, but it was also his first year back in the league. I think we saw flashes from him of his former self. Hopefully in Tennessee, he puts it together. I think they're setting Will Levis up for success. And if Will Levis is going to succeed, Calvin Ridley's going to be part of that. I don't mind having him at the end of the seventh round at all.
After Calvin Ridley comes off the board there, Javonte Williams and Nick Chubb go on the 7-8 turn. I'm still a fan of Javonte Williams, but guys, we haven't really talked much about Nick Chubb here, and I think it's just because there's so much unknown. Are you
Kind of
leading
like
your
that idea though.
drafts?
You take Javonte Williams and Nick Chubb, and you're getting one full healthy set of knees between the two players.
Yeah, I don't know how helpful that is for fantasy. But my question here is, I think a lot of people are going to see the Nick Chubb name. And remember, there's a lot of name value to this guy. Is this someone that fantasy managers should just be avoiding at all costs, regardless of the average draft position? Jagger, I want to start with you on that because I know you're a little bit of an ageist here with running backs.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's all the things. I'm an ageist. His knees hurt. Let's put it that way. Like,
So do mine.
it's hard. It's hard for me to say, yeah, I'm going to draft Nick Chubb, even Najee Harris. Like, we all hate Najee Harris, so I don't hate him so much. But like, I'd rather have that. I'd rather have Jalen Warren. And you know why? Because I know they're healthy. I know they're healthy. And then, people want to talk about, well, it's Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is now in a committee, guys. Let's keep it real. You got an older back on an injury. We saw what Jerome Ford did, and they're bringing in Deontay Foreman, who is, I would say, I'm not saying a Nick Chubb replacement, but he has the same
Yeah.
play style, albeit, way worse. This is a committee. So I know that Nick Chubb is going to live near and dear in our hearts, but this is playing a little bit too much with the heart and not so much with the reality.
Nick Chubb's just like us, man. His knees are a little creaky. He's a little old.
Yep.
It's okay, though. But yeah, I don't want to draft me for a fantasy football team.
I don't even know. Did you
Yeah.
mention Jagger? Did you even say Kareem Hunt and Pierre Strong's name? Like they
Oh,
have
no. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have so
They're
many
there?
running backs in Cleveland. Yeah, Kareem Hunt and Pierre
Bill?
both still with Cleveland. Like it is, and then Jerome Ford and Deonta Foreman. Like there are just there's a
Jokes.
lot of running backs in Cleveland.
Sheesh. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a guy that I think any of us are actively targeting, but I do think that might still happen in a lot of home leagues where people see the name value of Nick Chubb and they go, "Whoa, why is he still here?" And they'll pick him.
Oh my
That
God!
that's
They also
usually
have Naheem Hines. I'm sorry, they don't have Kareem Hunt. He's no longer under contract, but they do have
okay.
Naheem
Okay,
Hines now.
it's just we have Naeem Hines at home. That's all they did there.
Yeah.
Okay, so after Nick Chubb, Joey, you go with Najee Harris after Jagger has said that we all hate Najee Harris. You don't.
I don't.
So
No, I don't hate him
so
either. I was joking.
oh well then Jagger, shut up. At least half of the show right now enjoys Najee Harris. Okay, that's a 50% approval rating at least. So there's some optimism here, right? Arthur Smith is a guy who wants to establish the run. Uh, Najee Harris is slimmed down. That usually bodes well for a running back when they're a little bit more swift in the backfield. And then it's also a contract year for him. So I know I'm listing a lot of, let's just call them intangible things, but what about Najee Harris for fantasy football still gets you excited because you're relying on him heavily now. He's going to be your RB2 for fantasy.
Yeah, so I am absolutely excited about Najee Harris, my RB2. I do think Pittsburgh is just going to feed him this year. They didn't pick up that fifth-year option. I think that's pretty key. I think they're going to give him a good amount of work. They've kind of started reducing the amount of carries they've given him each season by about 30, and he keeps on getting more efficient. He's not getting as much of the passing down work, but if they're going to feed Najee Harris and give him, say, 270 carries, he had 252 last year. If they give him 270 carries this year, I think he can put together a really solid RB2 season. I'm totally fine with him as my RB2.
Alfredo, can you do a favor and just drop down the queue on your sleeper board so we can see the full board? Because right now we're just able to see the last few draft picks there. Just trying to make this a better experience for the audience.
I want to correct myself.
Well, the
Najee
audience was
Harris-
just going to be looking at just a few rounds there, Dave. So thanks
you
for
go.
that. They're
I'm gonna
only
correct
looking at
myself
like one
on
or
the-
two rounds at a time.
Alfredo, on my Najee Harris, he had 255, not 252. He had 3 more carries than I credited him for earlier.
Well, that efficiency just went down, Joey.
I know.
Yeah.
But I saved
Yeah, now you
myself
look
in the
foolish.
comment section of somebody being like, it was actually 255. So,
Man, this is the part of the show that people are loving right now. Dave asking me to open up the screen a bit more and us fixing the stat for 3 extra reps of something. Let's keep moving along here. David Njoku goes the 803, Raheem Mostert 804. He's one of those older veteran running backs that I think ends up being a great value. And I kind of keep just using that term of great value, great value, great value. You hear that all the time in drafts. People always kind of shout that at their friend when they make a pick. Oh, that's a great value. Can't believe he was there. But it just does seem to happen with a lot of these running backs. And when you do look at the board, and we're using sleeper here, you tend to see a lot more of the green is towards the bottom of that board as we get into round 6 and through 10, because that's where teams are taking running backs. They're taking more value. And so Raheem Mostert, this was a guy who was an instant starter last year. And for this CPU team 9, to have Raheem Mostert as their RB4, they're pretty set at running back. They're not doing great at receiver, though, as I'm looking at that roster. Holy smokes. Roma Dunze and Terry McLaurin. So that's an interesting build from them. But let's go to the next one here. Dave, you go with Jaylen Warren. So you got the other half of the Pittsburgh Steelers running back experiment here. Was this just sort of saying, I want to invest in a team that's going to run the ball and I'll take the guy that's cheaper and potentially even better?
Not so much that. Like, I'm not super crazy about the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I am pretty crazy about Jaylen Warren. And I just think that I'm sorry, Joey, to say this. I think he's a better running back than Najee Harris, and we've seen the workload go in Najee Harris's way in the past. But Arthur Smith is a madman, and we got to hope that he's going to give the ball to the better running back. And when you look last year, I could just read off some numbers really quickly. Jaylen Warren was phenomenal last year, 5th in the league in receptions, which you obviously want to see a guy who's heavily involved in the passing game. But then you start looking at his efficiency, led the league in juke rate, was number 3 among all running backs in breakaway run rate. He was number 3 in yards created. He was number 6 in true yards per carry, number 7 in yards per touch, 5th in evaded tackles, 8th in breakaway runs. I mean, I can go on and on. Like, you look at every efficiency number for Jaylen Warren, and he was objectively one of the best running backs in the league last year. So if he can maintain that efficiency on even a mildly bigger workload, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like under Arthur Smith, but if he can maintain that efficiency and get more touches, he's got a top 10 finish well within his range of outcomes.
And Dave, you did the ultimate kind of hero RB build here where you took Mixon in round 5, and then your RB2 is Jaylen Warren, Tajay Spears, Zach Charbonnet, guys that are either in committees or need an injury to become what we might dub as fantasy starters. Does that tend to be more or less your strategy when you're going through a draft, when you're coming into it?
Yeah, and I like zero RB. Like, there's a lot of times, I just recently did a draft where I waited until it was a super flex draft. I didn't get my first running back until round 12, and then I just hammered running backs for like the next 8 rounds. This year, though, I do see an opportunity to kind of do like I don't even know what you'd call it, because it's not really like hero RB. Hero RB is taking a running back in round 1, 2, or 3. This year, there's so many good mid-round values that I feel like I could still do kind of a hero build around a guy like Joe Mixon or Isaiah Pacheco or Alvin Kamara or Derrick Henry or Kenneth Walker. These guys that are going in rounds 3, 4, and 5, where you can really load up your wide receivers early. You can still get what I believe to be an RB1 in those guys that I just mentioned, still get an elite quarterback and an elite tight end, and then just kind of stockpile with later running backs later. So when you look at my RB2, I know a lot of people are going to see this screenshot on Twitter and say, I don't know how I feel about Jaylen Warren as an RB2. But the reality is my RB2 isn't Jaylen Warren. My RB2 is Jaylen Warren, Tajay Spears, Zach Charbonnet, or any of the other 8 running backs that I was going to draft later in this draft that would find themselves in a relevant role at some point.
Yeah, we share a philosophy, and it's not like you still have a hero build. It's just not like X-Men. You have X-Force, like those mid guys in the middle.
Yeah, Mixon
After
going in the middle of the 5th, like he should be going much closer up there to Pacheco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Yeah, I think Joe Mixon being on Texans, having that opportunity, because this is a guy that I think is probably going to get just the lion's share of the carries, but I think even most of them. I don't know that Dameon Pierce has much life left, guys. Or
Damian
Joey,
Pierce
you're
is just an awful fit for this offense as well. Like
That's
it
what
is
it is.
oil and water. So I think Damian Pierce ends up getting traded, if not before the season starts, at some point in season. We're just I see Jagger here saying it. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if he is straight up cut, because he is just a terrible fit for this Bobby Slowick offense. So I think Joe Mixon, it's a lateral move from what he was getting in Cincinnati, which is a high-powered, fast-paced offense. Joe Mixon consistently was giving us RB1 numbers in Cincinnati. I believe he does the same here in Houston.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bring Dameon Pierce to Tampa Bay, because Rachaad White can't break a tackle.
Yeah.
All Dameon Pierce can do is break tackles. So that's a combo.
Yeah, that would be a great 1-2 punch for Tampa.
Dameon Pierce in Dallas. I'm just gonna say it.
Ooh.
He doesn't have to leave Texas. All right, let's keep going on here with round 8, because after Dave selects Jaylen Warren, we see DeAndre Hopkins go off the board at the 806, then Brian Thomas, rookie wide receiver for the Jaguars, at the 807. Jagger, you keep the rookie trend going here, and you take Trey Benson, running back for the Arizona Cardinals, the 808. We see Jordan Love come off the board, and guys, I don't know about you, but it kind of seems like there's going to be good quarterback value everywhere. And just to maybe get off track here and not keep going straight down the line of this round, but to look at these final 3 rounds, we see Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jaden Daniels, and Jared Goff. And to be honest, as I'm looking at that grouping of
you regret Kyler.
I mean, I don't necessarily regret.
I could have gotten Caleb, or I could have gotten Jaden Daniels. So it's
yeah. I mean, and that's what I was gonna say. Is probably the guys I like the most are gonna be Jordan Love and Jaden Daniels. And to get Jaden Daniels in the 10th round, I think you're getting a guy that gives you top 6, top 5 upside just simply because of the rushing. And so, I mean, there's a very reasonable argument to make that you don't have to take quarterback in like your first 8 rounds. Even maybe you can get some of these guys like a Brock Purdy, like Tua Tagovailoa, like Jaden Daniels would probably be my target there if we're going for the ultimate upside in a rushing quarterback.
I took him to be greedy because what's underrated in redraft is buying guys that you can trade later, especially like a lot of these people in the around this round that I looked at, they probably aren't guys that I love in my lineup. So why not get a high upside quarterback in the middle of the season when someone goes down that you can get a little 2-for-1, or pick someone up off the waiver wire like a Gardner Minshew or something like that. And then you can get like a good running back later. So
I
didn't even realize that.
In my experience, I feel like there's almost no trade market for quarterbacks in a single quarterback league. And I've done that before, what you're saying, Jagger, and maybe it's just that my friends are jerks and they don't like trading with me. But like I've had so many years where I've got like a top 3 quarterback rotting on my bench because nobody wants to trade for a quarterback, when they say, why would I give up any assets when I could just stream a quarterback off the waiver wire and play matchups? So I think that's kind of, I like it in theory, and I do it in Dynasty all the time, just stockpiling quarterbacks. But I've noticed in single quarterback redraft leagues, it's really tough to get a deal done for a quarterback.
Fair.
David,
again,
I think
this could just be my friends.
No, because I was going to say the same thing. Like I run across the same thing there too. I don't necessarily always see a big market for quarterbacks. The ones that you see is everyone saying, I need to trade for a running back. I need to trade for a running back, because someone always has an injured running back. Joey, you were going to say something here about Jaden Daniels and having that quarterback.
Yeah, and then Dave threw a wet blanket on my joke, so I'm not going to say it now. No, I was going to say, like, when Anthony Richardson only plays 3 games, I will be reaching out to Jagger to grab Jaden Daniels.
Whoa.
If it happens, I'm coming to find you, Joey. You put it into the universe.
Joey just got booted from the chat. All right. Moving along
Tony
here.
Reale mute button.
Oh my! I'm shaking how angry I am at you for saying that, Joey. All right. After the 809, Jordan Love goes off the board. Deontay Johnson at the 810, which I don't think there's a lot of players you can get that are the wide receiver 1 on their team, and you can get them this late, especially. And we talked about Deontay Johnson and that
McConkey and
Panthers
Christian
offense.
Watson.
Sure. Okay. It's not quite the same. Not quite the same.
It's not. No, Deontay Johnson's a great value this year.
And that's who I had queued up for my pick there in the 8th round. And so Deontay Johnson goes off the board right before me. I love that with Dave Canales. I do think he's going to get hyper targeted from Bryce Young. They just want to make Bryce a bit more comfortable. At the 8-11, I went with Zach Moss here. Starting running back on a good offense should maybe not get 70% of the work, but it's probably going to be closer to a 60-40 split with Zach Moss and Chase Brown. And we've talked about Zach Moss when we did our running back rankings show, that we talked about how this fit in Cincinnati is perfect for him. So if there's a guy, yes, it could be, same thing we talked about with Zamir White. This could be another Mike Davis or Alex Madison or whatever it is. I'm still fine with the value here. Late in the 8th round, take a shot on a guy in a good offense. It's going to be a good fit that we've seen some production. I'm fine with that, especially, and the risk is baked into the average draft position there. And then as we turn, going from the 8th to 9th round, we see Ladd McConkey and Christian Watson. This team 1, they went running back heavy to start. 2 running backs, Christian McCaffrey and Josh Jacobs, and they just hammered wide receiver all throughout the rest of this. Where they go Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Ladd McConkey, Christian Watson, and Romeo Doubs. So I don't know that I really like it. I kind of see that, and I say, guys, I don't know that I like going running back or double running back to back to start off my draft here, because the value at wide receiver just kind of looks a little gross.
Yeah, yep. I'm just looking like that team 9, the CPU team that started off with Breece Hall and Saquon Barkley. Again, this is CPUs. They don't know what they're doing. AI isn't coming for your job yet. Maybe someday, but not quite yet. Yeah. But you look at what this team could have done well. Like Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, great start. Then instead of Rachaad White, had they taken DK Metcalf, and instead of Rocky Mostert, they could have taken who are some of the Brian Thomas, Deontay Johnson, somebody like that. I think you could still build a strong team with a 2 running back start. But the only example we have here, I guess we also have the McCaffrey and Jacobs team, which did it a little bit better. But team 9 just went overkill with the running backs.
Yep.
Team 6, the first team. Go for it, Jack.
With the first team, what kills me, if you're going to do that, they pick the riskiest wide receivers you could draft. If you're going to do that, don't do that with 32-year-old Keenan Allen. Don't do that with Jordan, always a bridesmaid, never a bride, Jordan Addison. What is Ladd McConkey?
It's a really long nickname, dude.
Yeah.
I'd have taken DJ Moore over Devontae Adams, and that team looks much better. And then, maybe George Pickens or Amari Cooper over Keenan Allen. Yeah, it was and again, this is what we have to deal with the CPUs. They aren't quite as sharp as us.
Would your thoughts change if you would have gone Adams instead of Jacobs in round 2 and then taken Jacobs in round 3?
Yes.
I'm curious. Then it wouldn't have been running back. I feel a little better.
I mean, Dave, you make the comment about the CPUs not being that smart, but guys, we get into some home league drafts and you find that some of your league mates are not that smart either. It's just the God's honest truth, man. So it's that the people that are watching this right now, they're prepping for their fantasy leagues in May. These are the people that are just dialed in, locked in, as the kids say. So it is to be expected that they're going to have a little bit of an advantage over their league mates in fantasy drafts. Let's keep moving along here. Round 9, like I said, we start with Christian Watson at the 901. I went with Jackson Smith-Njigba at the 902. I'm just still really excited about that Seahawks offense and what can be done there. And having JSN as my wide receiver 4, I'm pretty comfortable with, and I do like the upside there. Team 3 goes with finally gets their quarterback here in the 9th round, and they go with Caleb Williams. Dave, I do want to hear you talk about him a little bit.
With DJ Moore too.
Yep.
Okay, well, so let me hear you talk about this a little bit, because typically there's not a ton of value to be had with rookie quarterbacks unless they are premier rushing quarterbacks. And so with Caleb, him going, a full round ahead of Jaden Daniels, is that something that you'd be doing?
No, I prefer Jaden Daniels to Caleb Williams, but ADP always has Williams going ahead of Daniels. And I think Caleb Williams is a fine pick here. It's not like he's not a rushing quarterback. He might not be a 1,000-yard rusher like Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels and some of these other guys, but I think he can easily rush for 600-700 yards. And, we saw, you just mentioned it on a show a couple of days ago, Daniel Jones was able to rush for 800 yards and finish as a QB1. And you've got that sort of rushing output. You don't have to be a great passer, but, I think his season long passing prop right now is already closing in on 4,000 yards. So if he's able to pass for 4,000 yards, rush for another 5, 6, 700, he can easily finish as a QB1.
They've got him at 4,000.
Close to it.
Close to okay. He'd be the first one. So
yep.
For the Bears.
Oof. All right, so after Caleb Williams, we see Devin Singletary come off the board, another one of those guys who's being thrust into opportunity. And we're probably going to do an episode on that of just players that have major opportunities in front of them, because these are the guys that we really need to figure out their values and where we want them to go in drafts. Jagger, at pick 905, you go with Curtis Samuel here. And I rarely pick on you, but I don't like this pick. And I want you to convince me otherwise, because I get the argument that maybe Curtis Samuel can be the wide receiver 1 in this offense and he can be productive. I just don't find myself drafting any Curtis Samuel. I don't know if it's a mental block or what it is, but why are you going Curtis Samuel here as your wide receiver 4 on this team?
I'm gonna make you sound right, and then I'm gonna push back. I know it sounds weird, but I've never liked Curtis Samuel. And then I started looking at his usage, and then like his chartable routes. And this is someone who's an objectively good receiver who's just been on bad teams. And because I didn't understand. I'm like, why is Curtis Samuel getting all these touches? And I was like, wow, he's actually earning them. And when you look at his reception perception profile, it's like he could be used deep and all over the place. Even I think more so, even more versatility than someone like Khalil Shakir. And then the next big reason is he's basically raised by Joe Brady's offense. It's someone that he really values and someone who knows it. So especially down in this range, I really like safety. And maybe like Dave's one of the best redraft guys I know, and understanding this, maybe that's wrong to think that, but when I go risk it for the biscuit early, I look for them safety pieces that I could throw in. Like, man, you can give me 9 points if someone gets injured or if I'm on a bye week. And that's what I see with Curtis Samuel, especially when we look at these wide receiver rooms that are wide open.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a tough time with Curtis Samuel just because we've seen what he is up until this point in his career. The best season he ever had was with Joe Brady a few years back in Carolina. And that year he went for like 850 yards. And that was when he was younger and he had less target competition. So my fear with Curtis Samuel is just that's kind of his ceiling, is that we see 800, 900 yards this season and not much beyond that. I don't dislike it. The one thing that I keep going back to is the kind of thesis against Curtis Samuel this year is the same reason everybody was fading Deebo Samuel a few years back, where they were saying, well, he's kind of a low ADOT player and he only can score on gimmicky plays and things like that. And because of that reason, Deebo Samuel was falling into round 9, and then he finishes the wide receiver 2 unexpectedly that season. And I feel like that's kind of the fear everybody with Curtis Samuel this year. They're saying, well, he doesn't have a ceiling, and he's got a low ADOT and he can only kind of get the ball on gimmicky plays. And well, what if that ends up working out and being something in fantasy? I haven't found myself drafting a ton of Curtis Samuel, but I need to be a little bit more open to it, I think.
He's Timu DJ Moore. Moore didn't have like the greatest season ever because he was with the Panthers for so long, just rotting with nothing. That's kind of where I everyone
always talks about the Deebo role. I'm like, Curtis Samuel was Deebo Samuel before Deebo Samuel was Deebo Samuel.
Like, I believed what you guys did, and then I did a little bit of homework, and then at his price, I will risk it. And let's put it this way, to give another caveat, if I didn't have Josh Allen, I wouldn't make that pick. I'd probably take A.D. Mitchell or something like that. That's a little caveat.
Yeah, just have the last name Samuel, and apparently you'll be used in a Samuel role. After Curtis Samuel comes off the board here at the 905, we see Austin Eckler. Wow, how the mighty have fallen. Go off at the 906. I think this is similar to the Nick Chubb thing. I don't think a lot of us are actively targeting Austin Eckler, maybe if he falls to you at the right price point, but seeing him in the 9th round was definitely just a shock to the eyes. Then we see Jake Ferguson. So there's still some good tight end value to be had late in rounds 9 and 10. Dave, you go with Tajay Spears, who I think is just a fantastic pick here. If you're looking at a split or ambiguous backfield, however you want to look at it, and you just take the guy that's cheaper. And Tajay Spears going a full 2 rounds later than Tony Pollard, I think that's just a phenomenal investment. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal investment there. After Spears, we see Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, and so you're starting to see teams are adding second quarterbacks, and you might say, hey, that's not realistic. That doesn't happen. It absolutely happens all the time in home leagues. People take their second quarterbacks. A lot of people look at fantasy football as they do the NFL. You got to have a good backup. And so you do see that happen more often than you think, especially on shallow rosters like this, where you're saying, well, it's just one flex, it's 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. Let me really focus on having what a good player at that onesie position, the quarterback or tight end. And so that after those quarterbacks, Joey, this is where you end up with Jameson Williams. He's your wide receiver 5. And to me, that's kind of the perfect place to take a guy like Jameson Williams, who I actually see him as a high upside wide receiver 4. So for you to get him late 9th round as your wide receiver 5, I absolutely love that for you. I know you're a big Lions guy, and you've liked to invest in their offense. What do you see for Jameson Williams this season as the perceived wide receiver 2 on this team?
As my wide receiver 5, I'm hoping that he has that third-year breakout. We did see Josh Reynolds move on, who was Jared Goff's guy. Whenever there was trouble for the Lions, Reynolds kind of was the guy that would get Goff out of trouble. I know in Modern St. Brown and LaPorta were always there for him, but if you watched Goff and you looked for the moments that he struggled, he was kind of always looking for Josh Reynolds. I'm hoping that can be Jameson Williams. They're not exactly the same kind of player. Jameson Williams is just going to streak downfield and get you big plays. In his first year in the league, he had a 40-yard reception for a touchdown and a 40-yard rush for a touchdown. Last year, he saw some games with, 7, 5 targets in the game. Hoping for more of that this year. I think as the wide receiver 2 on the team, he might be able to deliver a few of those weeks. So I love this Lions offense. I actually bought my first Lions shirt, Dave. I'm sorry. It's black and it says One Pride, and it's pretty.
Glad you got your pretty shirt.
I like Jameson Williams as a prospect a ton, and we talked about this on the show recently, Alfredo, where I said, like, if there's one guy that you can add a ton of context to for a disappointing start to his career, it's Jameson Williams. Torn ACL, gambling suspension, all these sorts of things. I think the fear is that, like, even if he is technically the wide receiver 2, he's still going to be like the 4th or 5th option behind LaPorta and Gibbs as well. But again, you're drafting him so late that the upside is there, and Dan Campbell has been raving about him so far this offseason, saying that he's just a man on a mission, that he looks better than ever. And if he can return to being the player that we saw in college, I mean, Jameson Williams was drafted top 10 in the NFL for a reason. He's an unbelievable talent, just hasn't been able to get it done so far at the NFL level, but the upside's there to take a swing as your wide receiver 5 for sure.
He's one of those guys that ends up being kind of perfect if you're doing the opposite of what Jagger mentioned. So if you go sort of safe early in your draft and then you want those high upside guys later, he's one of these perfect players that you can look at, especially right here in round 9 as your wide receiver 5. I think that's a great pick, Joe. And then you get here to the turn going from rounds 9 to 10, Dallas Goedert, Keon Coleman, another guy, Keon Coleman, who I think the wide receiver 1 spot in Buffalo is up for grabs. I don't know how valuable that wide receiver 1 spot is actually going to be. I do think there's going to be quite a bit of spreading the ball around, and Dalton Kincaid probably ends up being their wide receiver 1 for lack of better terminology there. And then Joey, you close out the draft grabbing Blake Corum as your RB3, who listen, there's already a little bit of injury concern with Kyron Williams. So far it's said, it's nothing, don't worry about it. But like we have mentioned over and over and over, there have been 4 different leading rushers over the last 4 seasons for the Rams. There's a new guy every year. Blake Corum could be that guy, but hey, it could also be nothing. And so we see it in the 9th and 10th round. You're taking these guys that have incredible upside, Joey. So I love those picks there for you. Let's keep moving along. TJ Hawkinson goes to 10:03. Dave, you mentioned that medical Twitter is already talking about how TJ Hawkinson might not even play this season. Like there is a possibility of that. And so can you even draft a guy like that if there's a possibility he might not play, even if it's a 10th round? This is a second tight end for this team. I don't know that you can draft him in the top 12.
Yeah, I think my biggest argument against drafting TJ Hawkinson or Nick Chubb that we talked about earlier, unless you have really deep benches or an IR spot, why draft a guy that you're probably going to end up dropping during bye weeks? And I think a lot of people are going to do that. They're going to draft TJ Hawkinson, they're going to draft Nick Chubb, and then bye weeks are going to come around and they're going to say, I got to drop these guys. So unless you've got like, 8 to 10 players on your bench, or you've got IR spots that you can plug these guys into, I'm not interested in drafting either of them.
You make a really valuable point there, though, about having the IR spot. So it's really important for people to know your league, because if you have that IR spot, TJ Hawkinson becomes a perfectly fine pick. It doesn't hurt you or hinder you. So as long as you can get the value there.
His hammy, and then you got to drop TJ Hawkinson.
Okay. Okay.
Watson.
You know what? I don't like this show right now. I don't like that you guys are talking about injuries, and I need you to cut it out. Thank you. All right. Pick 1004. We see Gus Edwards come off the board, potential starting running back for the Chargers, going in the 10th round. So yeah, Team 9 with the rarely seen but often desired, apparently, 5 running back build here in the first 10 rounds. Dave, you go with Zach Charbonnet here, who I kind of want to talk about your pick and my pick at the same time. So we'll get there in just a moment, because I want to see what went into your decision making here with Charbonnet over my running back. After that, Jared Goff, A.D. Mitchell, Jag. We already know you went with Jaden Daniels, then Justin Herbert, and this is where we start to see some of those quarterbacks coming off the board. Dalton Schultz at the 10-10. I went Brian Robinson at pick 10-11.
Love it.
And so, Dave, this is what I want to talk about here, because maybe I'm wrong, but I'm looking at Brian Robinson as the starter right now in Washington, with Eckler as the complement, versus, maybe I'm wrong here, but I see Walker as the starter in Seattle with Charbonnet as the complement. And both these guys have very good upside if there's an injury to the other running back. So what led you to go with Charbonnet over Brian Robinson at the 10:05?
That he's my RB4. And at this point, like if you're looking at projections for Brian Robinson and Zach Charbonnet, Brian Robinson clearly the better player, or projects better than Zach Charbonnet does. But I'm not looking for projectable volume right now. I'm looking for upside at my RB4 position. And with Brian Robinson, I think his upside is ultimately going to be capped a little bit playing with Jaden Daniels, and playing with Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, even if he is dust at this point in his career, is still probably going to take on a lot of the passing down work. Jaden Daniels could snipe some of the goal line work from him as well. Zach Charbonnet might project for nothing week 1. What we saw last year is that Kenneth Walker was the clear workhorse here, but in the event of an injury to Kenneth Walker, then Zach Charbonnet gets plugged in on it, what we expect to be a very good Ryan Grubb-led Seahawks offense. Zach Charbonnet has it in his profile to catch passes and take on goal line work. So, Brian Robinson is probably the safer player and projects for more volume. At this point in the draft, round 10, when I already have 3 running backs and I'm doing this kind of RB2 by committee, looking for ultimate upside with every single pick, Zach Charbonnet just has so much more upside than Brian Robinson does.
That was a very reasonable take.
Yeah, that was
really very well thought out. Yeah, look at you, everyone. Let's give Dave a golf clap here, really quick, please. Yeah,
we need a soundboard. Well done. Like we really need one.
Also, someone just listening to this doesn't sound right. All right, let's move on here. Jagger.
Are we going to the cold open about me not having pants on?
Yikes. All right, let's finish this podcast up quick. And I really want to hear a compliment about my pick, because Jagger, you said you love the Brian Robinson pick here. Second to last pick of the draft. It's my RB4 here in the 10th round. So what makes you say that you love Brian Robinson as a pick this late in the draft?
I mean, you've kind of already said all the things that I've said. I don't think Austin Eckler is an every down. Like, I don't think he's an early down back at all. If anything, I think he's going to come in on third downs and kind of, to say change of pace is like bold, because I feel like that pace is slower if you watched any Austin Eckler tape. But like, yeah, you can have him come out in third down, run a route, catch a dump off, and hopefully get a couple yards. But Brian Robinson will be the only person that's going to get, I think, consistent goal line looks. Even when Eckler was in his prime, he was never a good goal line back. He even said it himself several times that he's not great on the goal line. So especially this deep as your RB4, I mean, you technically could have an RB2 that costed nothing. Let's put it this way. If I didn't want to go with the fun pick, I had my finger on the trigger for Brian Robinson. I was just like, you know what? Let's just get Jaden Daniels, because this is a simulation that we're living in. So
yeah, I'll say like all 3 of us are pretty sharp. The way I had it queued up going into round 10 was Blake Corum, Zach Charbonnet, Brian Robinson. And Joey took Blake Corum, I took Charbonnet, but Robinson was my next choice. I don't think he's a bad pick by any means. I just prefer the upside slightly for Charbonnet and Corum.
Yeah, and that's just I want to get that distinction, get that context for people, because I'm sure they're looking at someone saying, "Oh, he went before him, so obviously this guy's better," or they rank them higher. And so I love that you added that context to why you went Charbonnet there. Let's do the quick recap of the teams here, guys. And so I'm gonna pull up our teams, and we'll go up with mine first. I get Kyler Murray at quarterback, Alvin Kamara and Zamir White at running back, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Collins at wide receiver, Travis Kelce at tight end, Devontae Smith at my flex, and then the bench is Zach Moss, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Brian Robinson.
Alfredo, I'm about to blow your mind. Minimize out of that again. I'm going to walk you through this just to annoy you. And then just click on your face up there.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to read it in roster format, not in pick order.
Fair enough. All right.
Yeah. No, don't worry. That's only your second attempt to make me look stupid on the screen. We're fine.
To defend you, I prefer roster format. It actually sees construction that way.
It's not my first rodeo, Dave. Oh, gosh. All right, let's go to the next one here. Fantasy Blue Chip, Mr. Jagger May himself, goes with Josh Allen at quarterback, Ramondre Stevenson and Jonathan Brooks at running backs, and then wide receiver, Jamar Chase, Malik Nabers, tight end, Dalton Kincaid, flex spot, Zay Flowers, and then your bench with some high upside guys, Trey Benson, Curtis Samuel, and Jaden Daniels. And then after that, let's go to Dave. Hey, Dave, did you know that you can actually just minimize this, and when we click your face, it'll show up? Oh, hey, look at that. Okay, so Lamar Jackson at quarterback, and then at running backs, Joe Mixon and Jalen Warren. Wide receivers, A.J. Brown, Drake London. Tight end, Evan Ingram. And then at the flex, Jalen Waddle. That's odd to see Jalen Waddle at the flex. That is a very high-value wide receiver team. So I like that one a lot. At the bench, Chris Godwin, Tyjae Spears, Zach Charbonnet. Some good upside there for you, Kluge. And then let's finish up here. Joey, drafting out of the 11 spot. Joey, you have Anthony Richardson at quarterback, James Cook and Najee Harris at running back, Puka Nacua and Marvin Harrison at wide receiver, Trey McBride at tight end, and then Michael Pittman at flex, another guy who just, it's odd to see him at flex, but you have good value on your team here. And then the bench, Calvin Ridley, Jamison Williams, and Blake Corum. So another set of some good high upside guys. We're going to be posting this on social media, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. We're going to be asking you guys who you think won the draft. Let us know in the comments of this YouTube video down below. Who do you think won the draft? What was your favorite pick? What you'd like to see us do differently maybe on a team build, and what your questions might be on how to build your rosters. We're going to be back again at we're going to be back again next week, right, Dave? You're back off of as you like to say, assignment? You'll be back in town?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, fantastic. Cool. Okay. So we're not missing any weeks here. We're going to be back again with our next show. But I want to thank you guys for joining us here. A big thank you to Joey Wright, Jagger May. You guys are awesome. Jagger is now on the Football Guys Dynasty show, so make sure you go check that out. Dave was on just a couple weeks ago talking about running backs. It was a great episode. Then you guys recently had on Matt Harmon to talk wide receiver, so phenomenal there.
That was a great episode also. I checked that one out. It was really good stuff.
Really good. You can always join Joey over in our Discord where they're doing mock drafts basically every week. Am I right, Joey?
Yeah, and we introduced video elements to it last night, and that's why I say we need a soundboard, because Discord's got a soundboard, and guys, I had some fun last night with the soundboard. We need one.
All you gotta do is just clip that right there of you just saying, guys, I had some fun last night, and there you go. That's a new sound drop for your soundboard. You're
beautiful.
Welcome. And then obviously, of course, if you enjoyed this show, please make sure you're subscribed, whether it's to the audio side or the YouTube side. And then once we get into the season, we're going to be doing 4, 5, 6 episodes per week. We're going to be here all throughout the season, helping you with your fantasy lineups. And then you get the Sunday morning live start sit show with Jagger May and Joey Wright as well. So if you enjoyed this, be sure that you're subscribed to the channel. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching all the way through. We'll see you next time. Adios.